It's my pleasure today to introduce our guest speaker that's speaking with us. Johan Revalk has worked as a CEO, lawyer, law lecturer, contracts and compliance manager, a journalist with the Advertiser and a policy government relations and communications advisor. John is currently business partner and stakeholder engagement with Adbri, best known in SA as Adelaide Brighton Cement, as President Cam was mentioning earlier. This Australian manufacturer of cement, lime and dry blended products since 1882, and I thought it was quite nice to have a very historical South Australian business share our lunch today, as we're in 100 years for history as well. He has many years of legal and a diverse senior management and policy experience in the private and public sectors. Now I'm going to hand you over for him to present a little bit about himself. He has some other amazing credentials, but I'm sure he'll capture that in his presentation. Welcome, Johan.
Thank you very much. I was delighted to be asked to join you today and speak at Rotary. I joined Adbri late last year. Before that I was working with Nearstart at Port Pirie. And the editor of the local newspaper, The Recorder, a lovely man called Greg Mayfield, asked me to a Rotary dinner, and then suggested that I join Rotary, which I did up at Port Pirie, and they've got a great group up there doing a lot of good stuff. And for many years I'd heard a lot about Rotary because one of my family friends was a former district governor, a lady called Katina Jones, who some of you may have met over the years, and she also sung the praises of Rotary. And then, coincidentally, you had this excellent excerpt in the Advertiser. That was really interesting and timely for me to learn about you. Congratulations on 100 years of serving the community. Very interesting to learn about the role of Sir Donald Bradman. A very appropriate place to be holding your meetings, given that legacy. And as Julie mentioned, last year Adbri celebrated 140 years of operating. So it's 141 years nearly by now, and the Premier, Peter Malinauskas, kindly came along and joined in the celebrations. And I heard that he spoke here recently too. I worked for quite a few years with his father, Peter Malinauskas, Senior, in the state government. Also, a very eloquent person. So I'm very happy to give a talk at sort of a high level about Adbri. Given that 140-year history, there's not many South Australian companies which still have their head office still left here. I was corporate affairs manager at SGIC when it was privatised in the mid-1990s. And that's happened to so many South Australian companies, but 141 years on, Adbri is still going strong. And I'll go through a little bit during the PowerPoint, but I promise I won't do death by PowerPoint. I'll skip through things and make sure I stick to the time. Speaking of the good work that Rotary does, it was interesting prior to the lunch arriving, I was hearing about some of the work here, such as the involvement with Trees for Life. It's fantastic. When I was about 16, the founder of the precursor to Trees for Life, it used to be Men of the Trees, Richard St. Barbe Baker came out here and he did a world tour. He's in his 90s by then, but an absolutely amazing man, so committed to saving the environment. And also the commitment to peace. It's probably never been more timely than what it is now, given the situation in the world, the peace polls. Sounds like you're getting even more interest than you originally expected. That's fantastic. My background was that I started working as a lawyer. I went to Adelaide University Law School. I was there at the same time as Jay Weatherall, so that's why I've got grey hair. Not because of Jay, but because of my age. I went from there to being a journalist with the Advertiser, as got mentioned, and not surprisingly, with that background, I ended up being a court reporter, and I covered some very interesting cases, like in the early 90s, it was the Polykovich war crimes trials from World War II. And there was international interest in that, and the Time magazine was there. But I'd gone from working as a lawyer at Mallison's in Canberra. I started at Finlayson's in Adelaide, then Mallison's in Canberra, and everybody in those days wore suits and ties. And I had a little panic attack when I arrived here, seeing that there were some ties being worn. It reminded me, when I switched from being a lawyer to being a journalist, I had the habit of wearing a suit and a tie as a young lawyer, and the journalists were a lot more casual than that. So peer group pressure got to me, and I started turning up to work casual. And on that very day that I was at my most casual with jeans, I got sent off to a black tie event with the then Prime Minister Paul Keating. This is at the time of the State Bank collapse, and I was told to try and get a quote out of him about that. But my main challenge was convincing him that I really was a journalist and I wasn't just some vagrant who'd walked in off the street. But at least I've got a suit, but no tie, so forgive me. Back to Adbri. The story began on the traditional lands and waters of the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains, way back 141 years ago. Over the years, and I'll go through the PowerPoint shortly, it's grown to be a national company, vertically integrated, a large listed company. Concrete builds our homes, schools, hospitals, infrastructure, and industrial developments. It's essential in the current transition to a low-carbon economy, and critical for renewable energy assets like hydroelectricity and wind turbines. So I'm just going to give a bit of an overview of the economic contribution to South Australia, to Australia, and the snapshot of the company's operations. Has a very strong commitment, and I've worked in the private sector, in the public sector, and I've been genuinely impressed by its really strong commitment to reconciliation. Earlier this year, we organised an event down at Birkenhead where there was a smoking ceremony, and a young Indigenous woman came and spoke. I'd met her. She came on board and had a visit of the site, and she grew up on the Lefevre Peninsula and had seen this big plant and not knowing what was behind the fence, and reached out to me. And I invited her to come along, and she gave a speech about what it was like growing up as a young Indigenous woman on the Lefevre Peninsula, and what a difference it made to her life that her principal really encouraged her to embrace her heritage and her history. And that's something that Adbri takes very seriously through things like traineeships, scholarships, Indigenous suppliers, and sincere recognition of events. Now let's see if I can drive this. So you can see the different brands that come under the Adbri umbrella. So as it says up there, provide cement, lime, concrete, aggregates. Adelaide Brighton Cement, of course, is we're best known here in South Australia as that. We've just recently rebranded as Adbri Cement, just in the last couple of weeks. But I imagine in 100 years' time it'll still be best known as Adelaide Brighton Cement. Operate all mainland states and territories. a large listed company with market capitalisation of about $2 billion. Last year, $1.7 billion in revenue and more than 1,500 employees. You can see a map. So in South Australia, we've got a manufacturing facility that you can't miss. When I drive down from Blackwood to Port Adelaide every day, you can see it there in the distance at Birkenhead. And there's also a manufacturing facility at Angaston in the Barossa Valley, and you can see the other brands across the nation. So in South Australia, there's a plant at Klein Point on the Yorke Peninsula, and there's a boat, the Adelaide, which you can see moored off the jetty there, which goes backwards and forwards between Birkenhead and the Yorke Peninsula every day, bringing limestone to produce cement. So it's interesting in Port Adelaide. It's a real mixture of being a working port with an industrial base as well as a growing residential area as well. But that port is essential for bringing the limestone every day. You can see the size of the Birkenhead plant there. It really is, it's massive. When you drive past on the Victoria Road there, you get a glimpse of it, but it's only once you go inside and you see how large it is. I've got some figures here about the capacity and what the raw materials are and what the products are. And here's just some images showing the chain of bringing in the limestone on the boat, producing the precursor to cement, the clinker, and then producing the cement and milling it, and then selling it. By the way, if you have any technical questions, I got a bit worried. There's a few engineers here, and at least one architect. Perhaps email them to me, and I'll speak to someone who knows what they're talking about. One thing which I found very interesting as someone who's just been at Adbri for under a year is the very strong commitment to using alternative fuel to try and reduce the consumption of fossil fuel. So you've got refuse-derived fuel there, sort of, for example, from construction waste. That would otherwise go to landfill, and the amounts involved are quite staggering. You could fill Adelaide Oval with the amount of alternative fuel that's used and therefore doesn't go to landfill. And particularly with gas prices being so high, that's being a godsend having that. And the intention is to increasingly use alternative fuel and reduce CO2 emissions as per the chart up there, and reduce the amount of waste going to landfill. There's a diagram for the engineers to get excited about. So a very strong commitment to sustainability, net zero and the circular economy. The goal is net zero emissions by 2050. It's actually not easy to do because the very process of making cement, you're burning rock, essentially. It's hard to reduce it. So you have to do what you can through things like replacing fossil fuels with alternative fuels. But we have made progress, a 38% reduction in greenhouse gases since 2010, and making the lowest embodied carbon cement in Australia. I'll be talking about our annual shutdown shortly, but one of the things we did in the January shutdown this year was to put in a new burner, which is more efficient and which can also use the alternative fuel rather than just purely gas. So every year there's a big investment in the local community down at Port Adelaide. You've got 500 contractors on site repairing and maintaining all of the equipment there. It's a $22.5 billion spend, so that's great for local contractors. But we're also very conscious of the potential impact on the community. You can see at the bottom there is a noise barrier, and that's our environmental advisor being the male model for that photograph. And that makes a big difference when you've got extra work happening on site. We don't want to upset our neighbours because we're right next to a residential area. You've got the Port River on one side and you've got houses right on the other side of the road. So that's something we do take very seriously. We've got a community liaison group and we meet with them. We run our environmental plans past them. We share all complaints that we receive with them. And we welcome their feedback and take that on board. So things like the annual shutdown, we make sure we keep the community updated. We've got a community website, the community liaison group. We'll send updates to the local council and to the local member, the Deputy Premier, Dr. Close. So that's something which is taken seriously. The part that I really enjoy is engaging with the community. When I was at SGIC as a corporate affairs manager, the managing director said to me, what do you reckon about sponsoring the rescue helicopters? Because Westpac at that time was pulling out. And I said, yeah, absolutely. A ride on a helicopter, I'll be in that. So that was great. And there are other sponsorships as well, like SGIC was very committed to road safety campaigns. But at Adbri, we're very much involved with our local community. I've got some photographs so you can see the Port Districts Football Club and you can see the tower from Adbri in the background, so you really can't miss it. I mentioned just then the community liaison group and also sponsoring a lot of local groups. Diversity is very important. We like to sponsor groups where there's a strong commitment to women and to Indigenous people. Like, for example, you can see the mother there and daughter. That's Lee Wallace. She's a student up at Port Augusta, and Adbri was happy to be able to sponsor her school fees. So I've listed some of the other groups that we sponsor, both in the Barossa and around Port Adelaide. The sponsorships are mostly locally focused, because that's it's the communities where we operate who are impacted by us. So local schools, sporting groups, arts groups, etc. But in the 30 or so years that I've been working with my strange career path, I'm very happy working at Adbri. It's a very ethical company, very serious about its environmental responsibilities, iconic South Australian company, and a very supportive workforce. So I'm happy there. I'm very grateful for the opportunity. I don't want to rabbit on for too long, but this is thank you very much. And if you have any questions, as long as they're not too technical, happy to take them on board. Thank you.
Thanks, Johan. That was really, really interesting, and how amazing, what a great South Australian business and how much it's contributed to people's lives, all of those employees. So do we actually have some questions? If you'd like to put up your hands, Milos will find you with a microphone. We have Jill. Oh, sorry, Heidi first.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really enjoyed it, and I really want to know what made Adbri such an ethical business. What was there a turning point, or has it always been that way? Do you know?
Well, I know that having the community liaison group, that's been in place, I think, for about 20 years. And the switch to using all alternative fuels rather than fossil fuels, again, is about 20 years. And the general manager in charge of the cement operations in South Australia, New South Wales and the Northern Territory, his name's Michael Williams, and he's based down at Birkenhead He personally attends the community liaison group meetings and is very open. Like if we make a mistake, like all companies do sometimes, like there are occasions where there might be some dust or their emissions a bit more than usual. It's not covered up. It's immediately announced on the community website. It's just the ethos, and that's something I think the EPA appreciates. So I think it's a long-standing culture.
Thank you very much. I hope this is not a technical question or too technical for you. My late father was a great pedant when it came to grammar, and one of the things he used to hate was when people would use the word concrete instead of cement. And he was well known for saying cement is a fine grey powder that blows away in the wind. So my question is, how do you stop, or what measures do you have in place that fine grey powder doesn't end up on everybody's roofs in the peninsula?
Yeah, there are dust suppression measures in place, like covers over stockpiles, and watering down, having the dust suppression measures, and sometimes there will be some dust that goes out into the community, and if people are affected, then say we get some dust on their car, Adbri is happy to pay for it to be washed, but generally we have environmental managers and advisors who keep an eye on that.
One more. Making cement invariably involves melting clinker, producing clinker. Without giving away any company secrets, what methods are being used in the many other cement plants around the world to meet the minimum CO2 emissions by 2050? What else can you burn?
Yeah, there are substitutes which are used, such as I think like black sand from Port Pirie, and there are definitely measures to reduce the clinker, but some of it is probably something I wouldn't want to talk about publicly, but it's top of mind. Look, we do have to reduce the carbon emissions, and that's something that is a major focus.
You can't do it electrically, though, can you, with it very well?
I couldn't comment on that. At the moment, we've got a burner which can use both gas and the refuse-derived fuel.
Thank you. I was with the gas company for a long, long time, and I hesitate to use the filthy word natural gas these days, of course, but I would like to just thank Adelaide Brighton for a tremendous association we've had with them, and to make a point that when you compare diesel, for example, and natural gas, it's sort of like comparing pea soup with mineral water. And, I'd like people to get that message because it's around for a long, long time. But what Adelaide Brighton Cement did for us was to convert, like the glass works and the brickworks and all the others, when natural gas became available, our output went up like about 20 times what it was when we were only really supplying the domestic and the smaller commercial market. And Adelaide Brighton and some of the other major energy users, tyre companies, for example, sort of put natural gas on the map. Now, everybody's day, there'll be plenty of other times, I think, for the gas industry. But, the one I wanted to particularly mention is we at Sagasco were the first to make a big deal out of using gas as a transport fuel, and my wife and myself filled up our cars overnight at the gas meter. But we were very big on bringing gas in as a fuel for the fleet, the bus fleet here. In fact, we were leaders in the world, and we put in about 100 buses in 1992 or thereabouts, and another 120 in about 95. And I noticed that the latter lot of the 120, they're still on the road and they're all doing very, very well. But the incredible thing was now, I had the privilege of being international secretary or president or something of the Natural Gas Vehicles Association, and it was marvellous to see the movement away from diesel in the shipping industry into natural gas as a fuel. It's happening all around the world and still is. However, it's not very well known, I think, that the Adelaide Brighton Company, that ship that it uses to bring the resource over the Gulf, that's been on that because gas, they got gas at a pretty good price, and their boat that does that job, it was running on natural gas. It was the first in the world by approximately 30 years, I'd say. So I'd just like to say how much of a life we enjoyed with them, and stick around because hydrogen's going to be there. Thanks.
Thank you. That's an interesting history lesson for me too. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation today. We've been very honoured to have you here. I know you're very busy and you did this at short notice. We really appreciate having the story about Adelaide Cement here today and the history. And talking about history, this is our little token of appreciation to you. There's a history book that one of our members has kindly put together with some collaboration of our history team in this club for our 100-year centenary. So I'm sure that you'll enjoy reading that. And all of the monies raised today go directly to Rotary community and youth projects. And your presentation today helps make this possible. So thank you very much and stay safe.
Thank you very much. Thank you.